She tried to have him killed for what he knew. A car rammed his vehicle on a rain-soaked road in the middle of the night. He threw himself out of the wreck and lay in the mud, bleeding, gasping, alive. The man who ordered the phone call that set it in motion was following instructions from a woman who believed 6 overheard words were enough to justify murder. But Tim Lawrence was not dead. And the evidence he carried was already copied, secured, and waiting for the one person who could use it to end everything she had built. Prince William. But this story does not begin with a car crash on a dark road. It begins with a whisper at Royal Ascot that was never meant to reach anyone's ears. 6 words at the races. Royal Ascot 2025 should have been a celebration. King Charles, despite his ongoing cancer treatment, appeared in the royal enclosure beside Camilla. His complexion pale beneath careful makeup, but his presence a signal that the monarchy endured. William and Catherine arrived together, drawing the crowd's focus immediately, smiling, composed, radiating the confidence of a couple the public increasingly viewed as the real future of the institution. Camilla sat beside Charles with a courteous expression. Beneath it, something very different was operating. She was watching William and Catherine absorb the attention of every camera, every commentator, every pair of eyes in the enclosure. She understood what that shift in focus meant. If Charles declined further, if the cancer progressed, William and Catherine would assume full authority. She would become irrelevant. A powerless widow stripped of the influence she had spent decades securing. Sir Timothy Lawrence sat nearby. At 70, the former vice admiral was known for his quiet loyalty and honest character. Recently honored by Charles as a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order, Tim occupied the role he had always preferred, present but unobtrusive, observing rather than performing. He was discussing the races casually with and when he caught a fragment of conversation from Camilla's direction. She was murmuring to an older advisor seated close beside her. 6 words that landed on Tim's ears like ice water. The throne must stay in my hands no matter what becomes of Charles. Tim turned slightly. Camilla's composed smile did not quite reach her eyes. Andrew spoke with the weariness of a man who had carried difficult knowledge for decades. His account was devastating. He described a marriage in which he had served as nothing more than a stepping stone toward Charles. He recounted a night when their son Tom was seriously ill in hospital, burning with fever, and Camilla had refused to come home because she was at Highgrove with Charles. Her exact words, according to Andrew, "My life doesn't revolve around the children. I need space for myself." Andrew's voice carried decades of suppressed bitterness as he delivered his summary. Power was something she could not let go of. What she felt for Charles was never love. It was ambition. She always envisioned herself wearing the crown. She was willing to sacrifice her own family to achieve it. He also described an incident from the 1980s when Princess Anne confronted Camilla directly at a private gathering, and told her she was the worst mother she had ever encountered and accused her of abandoning her children to insert herself into Charles and Diana's lives. Camilla smiled politely through the confrontation, but Andrew knew she was seething. Tim left the pub with a clear understanding. What he had overheard at Ascot was not an isolated remark. It was the surface expression of something that had been operating for decades. And if Camilla was capable of abandoning her own children in pursuit of position, the question of what she might do to a weakened husband was no longer hypothetical. The treatment she controlled. Tim's investigation led him to sources within the palace medical staff. What they described was far worse than manipulation. It was deliberate medical interference. In late August 2025, Camilla had arranged a confidential meeting with Charles's chief physician, Dr. Michael Harrington, at Clarence House. The doctor had recommended increasing Charles's treatment dosage, additional chemotherapy combined with immunotherapy, to slow the cancer's progression. Without it, his condition could deteriorate rapidly. Camilla rejected the recommendation. Her instruction was specific. Maintain the current treatment. Give him just enough to appear in public occasionally, but not enough for him to recover. She wanted a weakened king, one dependent on her presence, one incapable of making decisions that might accelerate William's ascension. When the doctor hesitated, citing his medical duty, Camilla's response was a threat delivered at close range. "If you say a single word, I will ruin you. I have influence over medical authorities, the press, and far more power than you realize." The doctor complied. Charles continued receiving insufficient treatment while the palace released optimistic public statements about his progress. The USB drive at midnight. The evidence that transformed suspicion into certainty arrived in the hands of a palace servant named Edward Thompson. A man of about 50 who had served at Clarence House for 2 decades, Edward had witnessed enough of Camilla's private meetings with the doctor to understand what was happening. Acting on his own initiative, he installed a hidden camera in the clinic room. On a storm-lashed night in mid-September 2025, Edward arrived at Tim's residence clutching a USB drive. His hands were shaking. The recording was clear, both image and audio. Camilla stood before Dr. Harrington, her tone cold and menacing. "If you reveal anything about Charles's true condition, I will destroy you and your entire family. This throne belongs to me. Keep him weak. Just enough. No more, no less." Tim watched the footage with a fury he had rarely experienced in his life. This was no longer suspicion or interpretation. It was documented evidence of a woman deliberately sabotaging the medical treatment of a dying king to preserve her own power. He copied the video onto multiple secure devices. He told Edward he would be protected. Edward disappeared within days. He was never seen again. The road at night. Camilla's network of informants identified Tim as a threat almost immediately. A guard had followed Edward from Clarence House and reported everything. Days after receiving the USB drive, Tim was driving home on a dark rural road after meeting another source. Rain hammered the windshield. A black car accelerated behind him without warning, its headlights blinding in his mirrors. The vehicle struck his car from behind with enough force to send it sliding across the wet road toward a steep embankment. Tim's naval instincts saved his life. He forced the door open and threw himself from the vehicle before it crashed into the undergrowth. He landed in mud and debris, cutting his arms and bruising his shoulder, but he was alive. Lying in the rain, breathing hard, he pulled out his phone and called Anne. She arrived in a panic and found him injured but conscious. They went into hiding at a secure location belonging to a trusted friend, cutting all public contact. From that safe house, Tim contacted William through an encrypted channel known. The recording played on a large screen before senior advisors, legal representatives, and officials. Camilla's voice echoed through the chamber. "If you reveal anything, I will destroy you. This throne belongs to me." Even the most experienced members of the council were visibly shaken. And spoke next, her voice firm but heavy with emotion. "My mother's wishes were clear. Those funds were entrusted to me. Camilla had no authority to interfere. She exploited my brother's condition to take control." After 3 hours of deliberation, the decision was unanimous. Camilla was stripped of all executive authority. Control over charitable funds and sovereign grant assets was restored to Anne and William. Camilla would retain ceremonial duties and the title of Queen Consort but hold no real influence over any financial, medical, or strategic decisions within the institution. The following morning, an official letter was delivered to Clarence House. Camilla read it alone in her study. When she finished, the paper was torn in her grip. She walked to the mirror in her bedroom and looked at her own reflection. No crown. No authority. Only an aging woman whose decades of ambition had produced nothing but isolation. The palace released a brief public statement attributing her reduced role to health considerations. The full truth remained confined to those who had fought to uncover it. The man who stood in the corridor. Days later, Tim stood beside and at a public event in Westminster Hall. He wore a formal suit and said nothing. His eyes carried the quiet resolve of someone who had faced genuine danger and chosen to act anyway. And held his hand and spoke softly. "You saved my brother. You saved all of us." Tim offered a faint smile and said nothing in return. He had never wanted to be at the center of anything. He had spent his life on the periphery of royal affairs by choice. But when 6 words reached his ears at a horse race, he understood that silence would make him complicit in something he could not accept. He thought of Edward Thompson, the servant who had risked everything to record the truth and had vanished for it. He thought of Charles lying on a sofa while his wife reduced his medication and pushed documents under his trembling hand. He thought of the car that struck his from behind on a dark road and the rain that soaked through his clothes as he lay in the mud. The monarchy survived because one man refused to ignore what he heard. Not a prince. Not a general. A retired naval officer who loved his wife and believed that loyalty to the truth was the only loyalty that mattered. Camilla now sits in Clarence's house, excluded from every meaningful discussion, watching rain fall over gardens she once believed she controlled. The dream of the crown produced nothing but emptiness. The power she pursued for decades dissolved the moment someone with the courage to act heard her say 6 words she thought no one was listening to. Do you think the council was right to keep the full truth from the public? And was stripping Camilla of authority enough? Or should she